everybody. Thank you, Suzanne, so much. Excited to talk to you all today. Only regret is that I wish we could be at Wells Reserve in person. It's one of the most beautiful spots in Maine. Great birds there. So I'm glad that programming is still continuing there, and I hope we can do another one of these in person soon. So let me get started here. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And if someone could just give me a thumbs up that they see that, just so I know we're going. Good, great. All right, let's go. Hello, my name is Nick Lund. I'm the Outreach and Network Manager at Maine Audubon, and today we're going to be talking about architecture with birds in mind. And let me make sure that works. There you go. And I'm contractually obligated to start with a slide like this, which is about my organization, Maine Audubon. We're the oldest and largest wildlife conservation organization in the state of Maine. We have 10,000 members, 2,000 volunteers, 7 chapters all around the state, including the York County chapter, which does their business out of Wells Reserve, and 8 wildlife sanctuaries around Maine. The closest down your neck of the woods is probably East Point in Biddeford Pool, which is a stunning place if you haven't been there. I should say we've been around since about 1843. We started as the Portland Society for Natural History and became Maine Audubon in the 70s. We have 3 parts to our mission. We educate, we conserve, and we advocate. So education, we do tons of different, or education, we teach thousands of kids, even this year remotely. School children, all ages, coming in, learning about science, getting their hands dirty. Conservation, we have biologists on staff who work in conservation projects involving everything from piping plovers and loons to trout to turtles. And advocacy, we bring what we've learned to Augusta and tell them how to protect the Maine and its wildlife and wildlife habitat. So if you're not a member, please go to maineaudubon.org and join us. We'd love to have you. Here's what we're talking about today. We're talking about birds colliding with windows, basically. This here is a sort of ghost image of a northern cardinal, I believe, that flew into a window. This is a major problem around the country, and it's something that conservationists and builders and homeowners are just sort of waking up to and taking action to prevent. So we're going to talk all about the problem today and talk about some solutions to it. How big of a problem is this? It's huge. This here is a chart pulled together by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service that estimates the number of bird deaths per year from various sources. You can see here there's all kinds of ones listed. The top sources are number 1, habitat loss. They don't really have an estimate for that. It's a huge number because we know that, as birds are trying to find places to live, and those places to live are becoming homes or leaving, those birds aren't, lose their houses. Cats is another huge one. That's a topic for another day, but scientists estimate, based on a number of studies, that outdoor cats kill about 2.5 billion birds per year. That's a huge number. Please keep your cats inside. But you see there, the second line down is building glass collisions. And through various studies, they've estimated that between 365 and 988 million birds per year die from colliding with glass. And you can see there that even the low number there, the sort of minimum number, 365 million birds, means that an estimated 1 million birds per day are dying across the country from colliding with glass. 1 million per day, every day. And that's the most conservative estimate. You can see that those numbers dwarf other sort of collisions, electrical lines, about 25 million, vehicle collisions, 215 million, wind turbines, 200,000. So this is a huge, huge problem around the country. When we're talking, taking sort of cats and habitat loss out of the equation, we can see that glass collisions are by far the biggest cause of bird mortality around the country, dwarfing things like poisonings and other types of collisions. And why is this happening? Migration. So I'm going to talk now a little bit about bird migration, just sort of a bird appreciation section of this program. And to give you a sense of, how birds are finding their way to your windows and under what conditions. Migration. Migration is the seasonal movement of birds to find food, basically. Happens in the spring and it happens in the fall. Here we are, September 3rd. We're just getting started with fall migration. It's actually underway for many birds right now, including a lot of the shorebirds that are moving out front of Wells Reserve. But passerine migration, songbirds, are really just picking up now. And a lot of those birds are what we expect to see colliding with windows over the next month or two. How many birds are we talking migrating? A ton. You can see here that in the spring, the blue numbers, about 3.5 billion birds migrate up from the south into the United States. Of those, about 2.5 billion continue on to the boreal forests or the tundra in Canada. And then in the fall, getting started right now, the orange arrows, you can see that more birds, about 4 billion birds come south out of Canada, and 4.7 of those move on to Mexico, South America, Central America. Why are those numbers bigger in the fall? Of course, because those birds all had babies over the summer. And so there's a lot more birds to come south than there are to move north. And I should say too, this is just migratory birds, right? So this is about half the total birds in the country. So about half of the birds that we have are migratory, about half are residents. That gives you a general sense of the total bird numbers for the country. What does that look like? You can actually, this is a huge biological movement of animals. So many, individuals are moving, so much mass is moving that you can actually you can visualize bird migration with radar. These are weather radars, these little white dots all around. And you can see this image from April 28th. You can see, so down here, this is like precipitation, right? So these are clouds and rain. All the other dots you're gonna see right now, those are birds lifting off at night. So those big sort of explosions, those are birds moving, taking off at dusk to fly through the night to get to their destination. You can see this is moving through early May, the peak of spring migration. So this is a huge movement of species, one that we don't really, since it's happening at night, it's kind of hard to tell, but it's happening in huge numbers. Just moving ahead here. This is just sort of an appreciation of migration. Science is getting very precise at measuring how and where and when certain birds move. And there's a lot of difference, as you know, in where birds live and where and when they move to. This is a map of eastern phoebe migration. Eastern phoebe is a very cute little flycatcher that is in Maine one of the earlier birds one of the earlier migrants to show up. You can see they spend their winters. So over here is a chart of the months. And then the color is how many birds there are. Basically, the darker, the more birds there are. You can see that eastern phoebes spend their winters in the southeast. And then as the spring gets started, at about March, April, they start blasting up and finding their way north. And so they expand all over the eastern part of the country throughout the summer. And then in October, November, they head south again. See if I can get the slide to go. This is another species. This is the wood thrush. They don't hang out in the southeast. They hang out down in Mexico and Central America. This is a really interesting graph for a number of reasons, I think. One is notice how the birds aren't moving here around the Gulf of Mexico and up through Texas. They're just jumping the Gulf, right? So they go basically, come on, there you go. They go from the Yucatan and then they just start showing up. They fly directly over the water and show up here. So, it's a really important thing to think about in migration. A lot of these birds, because it's slightly faster to go this way, and there's fewer predators than there might be on this inland route, they just jump the Gulf. And so if you're down here in the spring along the Gulf Coast, there can be huge numbers of migrants coming over. Also important to look at here, just as we think about migration, is the difference in size of wintering grounds than breeding grounds. So you can see here that in the winter, these wood thrushes are basically packed into a pretty small area, right? And then in the summer, when they move up, they spread over a much larger territory. Oops, and I lost it. There you go. This is, I like this, it's important to think about, because when we're talking about conservation, think about the impacts of conserving land down here or losing a bunch of land versus impacts up here. It's really important to protect birds' wintering grounds just as it is to protect their breeding grounds, because the birds are packed much more tightly in the winter than they are in the summer. So just to think about. Why are birds doing this? Why do birds bother even doing this at all? It's food, right? Birds are bothering to come all the way up to Maine from Mexico because in the spring and summer, we have tons of insects to eat. Birds need insects, in particular, they need caterpillars to raise their babies. Caterpillars, if you think about it, are a perfect food to raise young babies on. They are abundant, they are easy to catch, and they are, bite size. They're not going to fight back. Caterpillars are basically little sort of protein burritos that birds can feed their babies and raise them up quickly. And they need to find a lot of them to survive. There are a lot of studies about exactly how many caterpillars different birds need to feed their babies. And a family of chickadees needs about 6,000 caterpillars to be able to raise babies up. Most all birds feed caterpillars to their babies and other insects like spiders. Even birds that we don't think of as eating insects generally, like cardinals and finches, need insects to survive. And that's why birds migrate. They come up here to exploit the delicious buffet of caterpillars that show up in the spring and summer. Different birds over time have evolved different ways of feeding and things to eat, and through that have developed different ranges. And so this is just showing 3 different closely related birds, 3 warblers: the black-throated blue warbler, the black and white warbler, and the yellow-rumped warbler. They've sort of exploited different niches, and because of that have developed different ranges and territories. Black-throated blue is sort of a dense forest bird, so you can see that it lives in, along Appalachia and up through the forests of the Northeast. Black and white warbler is a little more expansive and generalist, climbing on trees, so it sort of breeds all throughout this sort of odd range from basically the tundra down through Texas. And then the yellow-rumped warbler is sort of unusual in that it has actually developed, unlike most of these other birds which just eat insects, it's developed the ability to eat some fruits. And so you can see here that the yellow-rumped warbler is one of the few that actually lives in Maine in the winter. They feed on certain berries and things that can be found here. And that's allowed them to not need to migrate, which is a smart move because migrating, there's a lot of windows in the way, among other things. And so that just shows you how different birds can change. Of course, these passerines aren't the only birds to migrate. Loons migrate too, our famous loons. They don't migrate for food reasons. They migrate because they spend their summers on freshwater lakes, and in the winter, you can't swim on a freshwater lake. It freezes up. And so loons migrate between their freshwater lakes and the ocean, which never freezes in the winter. So us in Maine, it's actually, a lot of people, of course, we love our iconic loons that we hear from our camps or hear from the lakes. It's actually easier to see loons generally in the winter on the ocean than it is in the summertime on their lakes. And raptors move too, of course. When the snow come and things freeze up, then ospreys can't get the fish they need. And so ospreys migrate. You can see this is the GPS tracks of some ospreys as they've gone down. Ospreys are different than most raptors in that they're a little more comfortable over water. And so you see the trail of the ospreys goes over some of the Caribbean islands and down to Central America that way. Most all other raptors will fly around the Gulf and migrate down over land only. And then, of course, some birds don't migrate, right? If you don't need to eat insects, if you don't need to eat fish that are under the ice in the winter, you can just hang out. And so here's a little set of birds that we have here in the winter that are eating our berries. These are, of course, our black-capped chickadee. This is a sumac, I believe. Red crossbill here, eating seeds from the pine cone, and cedar waxwings eating these berries. Winterberry, I'm not sure what those are. Other thing about migration that, like I said, it happens mostly at night. Here is an image of the moon taken by my colleague Doug Hitchcock. So you can see right here is a little bird flying across it. Birds migrate at night because it's generally calmer and because there are fewer predators around. And so it's safer to do it then. Of course, there are different challenges. You can't see anything. Birds mostly migrate by the stars. And so as birds fly up in the air, they call to each other and they all sort of face the same direction using the stars. This means that when the stars aren't visible, like when there's cloud cover, birds can easily get disoriented. And that's when we see an increase in bird strikes in cities and things. So that we'll talk about that a little bit later. You know, of course, migrating at night has new challenges for birds. You know, 200 years ago, you would fly over the United States and you wouldn't see any lights at night, right? You'd be flying over pitch blackness and you would use the stars above you and guide yourself. Things have changed. This is what the United States now looks like at night. And you can see that this is a very different landscape for a bird and potentially one that's much more challenging in terms of executing the migration. And this is what can happen when things go wrong. So we're going to shift now to talk about birds interacting with buildings and the problem of bird collisions. This is a little common yellowthroat warbler. So there are two main problems that cause bird mortality with buildings. The largest is glass. Glass is by far the biggest predictor of bird collisions. If you look at a building, it's basically, you can judge a building, how dangerous it is, basically just by how much glass it has, right? This is the Javits Center in New York. If you were to take a guess at where this ranks in sort of dangerous buildings to birds in New York, you would be correct if you guessed very, very high. This building for a long time was the most dangerous building to birds in New York City. We'll talk about what's going on there a little bit later. Why is glass dangerous? Well, birds don't know what glass is, right? Birds don't know what glass is. It comes down to that. They don't see very well. The majority of birds, especially passerine birds, don't see in front of their face very well. A lot of birds have eyes mounted on the side of their head, which allows them to look out for danger over a bigger swath, right? But it gives them sort of a blind spot in front of them. It doesn't give them very good depth perception. And so as birds are flying, it's very easy for them to mistake a reflection from a window for an actual piece of habitat or the sky. A lot of birds that are prey have eyes mounted on their sides so they can look for predators. A lot of predators, like this great horned owl, have their eyes mounted like humans. They give side by side, which gives them binocular vision and better depth perception so they can hunt better. And consequently, we much more often see the prey birds being involved with building collisions than predator birds. So it's not, there are exceptions to that, but the vast majority of birds that we're talking about are smaller passerine songbirds. How many? About 275 different species have been found in the eastern United States after colliding with windows. In this image, which I believe is from Toronto, we have a whole swath of different birds. I see some ovenbirds down here. I see some wood thrushes here. I see some flickers and sapsuckers over here, woodcock. Lots of different birds have been found after colliding with windows. Why is this happening? Well, like I said, birds don't know what glass is, and it can be very reflective. So when the windows reflect the sky, birds don't know that it's not the sky, right? It's basically as simple as that. Here's an image from a building reflecting the sky, and if you're a bird, you know, it's very challenging for you to be able to sort of unscramble this information and recognize that it's a big solid structure instead of a piece of sky that you can fly into. For several years, so I'm from here in Maine. I lived in Washington, D.C. For 7 years between 2011 and 2018. And for many of those years, I volunteered for an organization called Lights Out DC. One of the things we did down there was walk routes around Washington and try to, very early in the morning during spring and fall migration, to try to figure out find birds on the sidewalk and figure out what buildings they were colliding into. This here, it was one of the biggest offenders. This is the Tech World Plaza on K Street in DC. You can see here there's this big glass skywalk thing. You know, if you're a bird, you see sky below, you see sky above, you see sky in the middle. Birds had a very difficult time identifying this as a structure, and we would see birds all over the place. This construction wasn't here, obviously, most of the time. You would find birds all over the place down here at the bottom after colliding with this particular structure and these buildings on the side. So this gives you an example of sort of the type of building that can be really egregious in terms of killing birds. So buildings, windows reflect sky. It also reflects habitat, right? Sometimes birds are just passing through. A lot of times birds are trying to find a place to land, find some shelter. And so you see this set of windows here. This looks like a forest. So if you're a bird just flying around looking for a place to hang out, this again is very difficult for you to interpret, and it's very, you know, it would be common for you to sort of fly into this and injure yourself. Anybody know where this is? This is LL Bean headquarters in Freeport. They, of course, unfortunately have some mirrored glass reflective windows by their entranceway, which, you know, it could fool me that this wasn't, I wasn't looking through something solid here. This is just shows you that this is a ground floor window here, also very dangerous. Reflects all this habitat back here, reflects this vegetation. So the windows don't need to be high up. Actually, generally, the higher you go, the less dangerous it is to birds, and it's more dangerous along the ground. You can see that LL Bean has put in these sort of falcon silhouettes here. We'll talk about these a little bit later, but you know, spoiler alert: these are not doing anything to save the birds here. So, just to show you some other examples. So, glass can be reflective. It can also be transparent, right? Transparent windows are also very dangerous. This was the second most deadly building on my route in Washington, D.C. This is the Thurgood Marshall Judicial Center, right next to Union Station in Washington. It has these two big, like, marble buildings connected by a big glass atrium. And this atrium is reflective during some conditions, but it's also lit up very brightly at nighttime. And the atrium, you can't really see it here, but they filled it with trees. And so at nighttime, you have a big sort of beckoning set of trees with a big glass force field in the way. And this part of DC does not have very many trees, and so many birds would be attracted to these trees at night. This is what it looks like at nighttime. Would be attracted to these trees at night and hit the glass. So you can see this is sort of a slightly different angle looking in. You see these trees. That looks like a nice place to be, but you can't get there. And so the transparency of glass is another sort of cruel trick played on birds that they can't get around. So the other problem is lights, right? So glass is a major problem, the biggest by far. Lights is another problem. And it's one that scientists are still sort of working to figure out. We know that birds are attracted to lights, but we're still trying to figure out under what conditions and what the attraction is actually doing. We do know that it's attracted to lights. This is an image of, this is the Twin Towers Memorial in New York City, which you may have seen this on the anniversary of 9/11. They frequently blast these very large lights where the towers used to be up into the air. Very beautiful tribute. But people started noticing that lots of birds were being attracted to these lights. You can see up here all these specks of birds on their migration. This, of course, is September 11th in the middle of fall migration. There were some studies done, and one of the things that the operators of these memorials do, they would turn the lights on and then turn them off for a little while. And counters were there to see count the number of birds in the way, when the lights were on and when the lights were off. You can see here when the lights were off, there were about 500 birds in the area migrating through. When the lights were on, that number jumped to over 15,000 birds. And so birds were attracted to these lights. It may have to do with collecting insects that were also attracted to the lights, feeding on the insects, but they're not quite sure, but they do know that it is a phenomenon. The combination of lights and glass can result in some sort of scary scenes. This video, which I hope will play, this is a video from the NASCAR Hall of Fame in North Carolina. One night, unsure why, a woman who was walking by found a whole bunch of chimney swifts who were colliding with the glass and dying along the sidewalk of the NASCAR Hall of Fame. No one's really sure what caused this or what happened, but it was some combination of the bright lights and the glass inside the building. Pretty scary. So again, scientists don't really understand exactly what's going on with lights. We know that there are many, many more lights now than there used to be. Cities are much more lit up at night. We do know that there is a correlation between weather events and birds coming down to lights. So when there's cloud cover, birds are coming down out of the sky and they are coming towards lights generally. But the relationship is not, particularly well understood. But it does happen. We do know, again, that one of the reasons is that birds that call a lot at night tend to be more attracted to lights. So these birds, when you're migrating, birds call to each other, right, to try to stay in touch. They need to make sure they're still together and going on the right track. And it's thought that if birds get disoriented and come down, they call to others and sort of, Pied Piper other birds out of the sky down to the ground. So scientists have recognized a correlation between birds that travel together in good numbers and communicate to each other and birds that are seen near lit up structures at nighttime. Let's talk about some of the good things. Let's talk about glass. There are solutions for glass. There are lots of solutions. Builders and architects and cities and things are sort of waking up to the fact that we can do something about these problems. The Javits Center, this very deadly building in New York, did a fairly expensive renovation to make their building less of a complete death trap to birds. And in the time since they completed that, they've reduced their bird mortality by 90% from this building, which is a big number. So it can be done. The three solutions proposed by the American Bird Conservancy, sort of leads the research in this field, is number one, use minimal glass. Number two, place the glass behind some kind of screening. Or number three, use glass with inherent properties that reduce collisions, right? So here's an example of number one, use minimal glass. So you can still have very beautiful buildings that aren't just covered in glass. I remember when I lived in Washington, D.C., where there was always a huge construction boom going on. It seemed like the only idea that any architect ever had was, hey, let's cover it all in glass. What do you think about all glass? So every building that was coming up was just mirrored glass everywhere. I encourage some of these folks to think a little bit more outside the box. There's other ideas out there. So this is a 911 call center in the Bronx that used some interesting strategies. This is an example of a building that's used external screening. So this is I think this is Frank Gehry in New York. I forget this building, but this is an art museum, I believe, the Cooper Union building, I think this is. And so this is a, you know, one of the benefits of glass, of course, if you're an architect, is that it brings in all kinds of beautiful natural light. You have, you can see, you know, the vistas and things. This building has lots of glass, but then has sort of a mesh screen over the top of it, which still allows all the light to come in, still allows you to see outside it, but looks a lot more solid to a bird and to, you know, other people. So a lot of these solutions, they look like they're opaque, but they're actually, you know, still give you a lot of the benefits from glass. You can see here at the, you can see here at the top, you can still see through this very easily, but it looks much more solid to a bird. This is just another example. This is the African American History Museum on the Mall in DC. Again, all glass structure inside with some very cool patterned sort of screening on the outside. This is the Javits Center, and they use another, so this is that glassed-in death trap in New York looking outside from inside. They use another strategy which is called Fritz. And so this is, we're getting to the section now of different types of glass. One of the things you can do with your glass is put little stickers on it, basically, or put little markers on it that still is a big piece of glass, but gives an illusion of being a solid object to a bird. These are ceramic Fritz, they're called, little dots. And you know, it's hard to convince you unless you're actually seeing it, but if you were to stand in front of this building covered in Fritz, you wouldn't see them at all. To the human eye, we sort of filter these things out, and they're very difficult to see. It still gives the appearance of a straight glass window. But if you're a bird, you see it as a solid structure. And so covering your windows in Fritz like this, or stickers like this, this is a product called Feather Friendly, that comes in these little sticker strips that you just put on your windows. It gets the job done. This doesn't look like a big empty glass piece anymore to a bird. And you have to take my word for it. If you're actually standing in front of this window, you would very quickly not see those dots, and it would look look like nothing was happening. Another strategy that's getting some traction is ultraviolet light embedded in the windows. So unlike humans, most birds can see ultraviolet light on the ultraviolet spectrum. And so the thought process here is if glass makers can put ultraviolet strips inside a window, then it would appear like nothing to a human eye, but would appear like a solid object to a bird. Here's sort of an example of how that could work here. This is a piece of glass. You can see under human conditions, it looks normal. To a bird, there's all these things that look solid. And actually, I don't know if this is going to show up, but just the other day in the mail, I received a package in a fancy backpack and box from a company called Glass Pro. And they wanted to send me a sample of their UV glass. I think this is not going to work, but we'll try it anyway. Here in my hand is a little panel of glass. This looks completely see-through to me. I can't see it. They also sent this ultraviolet flashlight. Can you see that? So if this shows up, when I run this light through, I guess you can't see it, the stupid background. Right there, you can see it a little bit. So there's a solid strip down the middle. Well, see that a little bit? It works when you, there is ultraviolet embedded in this piece of glass that, in theory, to a bird, would give them the appearance that it's a solid wall. There's still a lot to be done here. The American Bird Conservancy, again, who's leading here, has done tests on some of these glass, and the technology still needs a little work. It's also true that not all birds see ultraviolet light, and so for those species, which include things like woodcock, those birds wouldn't get any benefit from these windows. But it's a promising technology, especially when you're talking to architects and things who want to minimize any sort of visual impacts for humans. There's also different etchings, glass etchings. Here's a couple samples of some different ways you can sort of carve lines into glass that give the appearance of it being solid. There's also translucent, I'm mixing up my technology here, but glass that you still get the benefits of light, but you can't necessarily see through privacy glass and things like that. Here's some beautiful buildings in Scandinavia that use this technology. So you still get light, but you're not seeing directly inside. And so this is much safer for birds. This is another Frank Gehry building in New York City. This is an all glass building that uses a combination of sort of Fritz down here and then translucent glass and other systems. So this is an all glass top to bottom building. The New York City Audubon has monitored this building in the 3 years since it was built and not found a single dead bird outside of it. So you can still build with glass and protect birds. This is another sort of popular, cheap and easy home system. These are called Acopian bird savers. You can see here there's some lines running vertically down this window. These are basically just parachute cords. These are basically just cords that you drape down along the over the window from the outside, which break up the reflection. Simple as that. Birds don't see this as a reflective window anymore, and this reduces birds clashing a lot. This is a very popular system for folks who don't mind the strings coming down. These bad boys do not work. These popular stickers that you see simply don't work. And it's not, you know, a lot of people think that the point of these stickers is to sort of scare birds, that there's like a predator around. Birds aren't falling for that. Stickers do work when they're on the outside of windows, but they need to be placed a lot more closer together than these. And I'll get to that in a second, but you can see here, so this is the 207 building on Congress Street in Portland. You guys know this building. This is my colleague Doug found this. This is a Cooper's hawk down here on the street. Beautiful raptor. It was likely chasing pigeons and hit some of these windows. He sort of took this picture because if you see in this photo here, which is just around the corner, you see one of those stickers. Not helping. Part of the problem, big part of the problem, is that you can see this sticker is placed on the inside of the window. That doesn't do anything to cut down on the reflection, right, which is occurring on the outside of the window. You can still see the reflection over the top of this. So it's important that if you are taking steps to reduce collisions on your own windows, to make sure that the materials are placed on the outside, unless it's sort of an etched glass or UV glass. Putting the materials on the outside is what cuts down on the reflection. Yeah, there you can see a better view of that sticker there. What kind of spacing do you want? I mean, what we're trying to do is a 2x4 rule. So one thing that scientists notice about a lot of the birds that are found having collided with windows is that they're birds that are used to flying through tight spaces. Tunnel flyers, they're called. So these are birds that are typically trying to fly into the vegetation that is reflected off the windows. Birds that are very comfortable sneaking through tight spaces and sort of moving into trees. And so so what that means is that if you just put sort of, you know, 2 strips around on your window, you know, 2 feet apart, birds are still going to fly right through that and hit the window just like nothing was there. And so what American Bird Conservancy recommends is a 2x4 patterning for your windows, which really makes it a small enough area that birds aren't going to try to fly through there. So solutions for lights, there are plenty. One is just turn off the lights, right? A lot of cities are engaged in sort of lights out during migration. Chicago, San Francisco, Toronto. You know, what's the point really of having your lights on at night? No one's in there. And so a lot of cities are finding success turning off their lights in good numbers so birds can migrate over safely. There's also a number of ways out there. I encourage you to just Google on the American Bird Conservancy website a bunch of different ways to reduce light pollution. So it's basically, instead of just blasting light up into the air, use fixtures that contain the light and shine it down on the ground. This makes it much more safe for birds, and you're also keeping darker skies, which is a beneficial thing around your home. So some other solutions, there's some policy solutions, right? Well, actually, before I get to that, so a number of cities are taking up this cause, recognizing the huge impact that glass buildings have on birds and taking action. By far the biggest step in this direction was in New York City, which in December passed a city ordinance that required all new construction to have bird-safe technologies, bird-safe glass. This is really incredible for this movement because as New York goes, a lot of other places go, and so places like San Francisco, Virginia, and some other places are really taking up the cause of bird-safe glass and requiring it in their building codes. I'll talk about Portland in a second. There's also materials out there. There's a LEED credit cert 55. Gets you some bird-safe technologies. Cities also have their own standards, like the San Francisco standards there. And we're working in Portland to do our own thing. So this is something that we're launching this Friday, tomorrow, holy cow. We're starting in Portland, but we'll take data from anywhere, which is that we want to raise understanding of this problem in Maine, because we want to get the type of legislation in Portland and eventually in the state of Maine that they have in New York City, which requires bird-safe technologies in new construction. And so what we're doing is we've launched this email address, birdstrike@maine.audubon.org, where we're encouraging people to, during fall migration, if they find dead birds on the sidewalk, to take a picture and send us the picture with the address and the date. We want to know which buildings are causing the biggest problems. We want to know which species are dying in Maine. And we want to bring that information to the city to have them do something about it. And we're optimistic about that. So if you're in Portland especially, that's sort of the focus area as we get started, but anywhere will be helpful. We want to know what's happening. So thanks. Number two is, keep an eye on your own home. We know some folks on the phone are concerned about their own windows, and there are easy steps you can take to reduce bird collisions at your windows. As I said at the top, I don't know if everyone heard it, a lot of the work here has been focused on cities because that's where the problem is more visible, because birds, appear on the sidewalk that lots of people can see. But this is not a city problem. All birds, or all windows, all reflective windows are potential hazards for birds. And although your home may only, kill 2 or 3 birds per year, adding that up around the country is how we get to the 1 million birds per day number. And so the small steps you can take to prevent collisions will eventually go a long way. So like I said, there are technologies out there that can help you reduce these collisions, and you'll feel a lot better about yourself at night. Third is just help us as we push these policy solutions in Maine. So our work is being done through our action alert system. So if you come to maineaudubon.org/advocacy, you can help sign up to learn about the bird safe policies that we are pushing. And that's how you can help us out. So that's all I got. Thank you very much. I would love to see if folks have questions.
Nick, there's one question that came just to me.
Yep.
From Karen. She said, Sanford just built a new high school with tons of glass windows. Are there any grants or other opportunities for organizations like this to find funding to make the building safer for birds? Also, if they keep their lights on, what are the month ranges in spring and fall, and that would have the most impact to have them off?
Great questions. So the first one, well, let me say too, again, everybody seems to think that the old glassed-in atrium is the coolest way to build a building these days. I gave this similar presentation in the Portland Public Library a few months ago, and then was invited up to speak to LL Bean, who is building a new headquarters in Yarmouth, in Freeport. And if you drive by that construction, you see that it's all glass. And we basically had a pretty uncomfortable conversation about what it would take to protect the birds from those buildings. And there aren't, as far as I know, grants that can help out retrofit buildings, but that is something that Maine Audubon is looking into as soon as we can, because because the technologies are out there to solve this, and we want to solve it. We have seen public pressure work in the past. For example, the Minnesota Vikings NFL football team built a big new stadium in Minneapolis, and of course, did a huge, big old reflective glass front. And Audubon activists there collected all kinds of dead birds that were colliding into it, and encouraged some change that's being put in place for that stadium. So what I would say, Karen, for the high school is it starts with information. We know that birds are hitting glass windows, but it helps to have images and sort of proof. And so one first step would be to, if you find dead birds in front of the high school, to take pictures, get information to keep in track, and then we can put the pressure on. So yeah, so the other question was, yeah, it's basically, birds are moving the most in September, October, and then April, May. So those are the months, and it's really May, September are the biggest of those. So if you're going to take some action to turn off your lights, those are the times to do it. And you know, we've seen success with that as well, especially again if you can show the building owners some proof that their buildings are leading to birds dying. I see a question from Tracy in the chat. Do most major window manufacturers offer bird-safe glass? No, they don't. It's sort of an emerging technology. We are working with a couple various companies, Glass Pro, Sigco Glass, but I've heard, so for example, there was someone trying to build a house in Kennebunkport along the water, and that featured a lot of glass, and their permit for construction was denied by the city because they didn't incorporate bird-safe glass. And so I got a call from a guy from Pella, the Pella Windows and Glass Company, saying, "What the heck? What's bird-safe?" So there's not a lot of information out there that companies have or manufacturers have for this technologies, and not all the companies are here. It's an emerging field for sure, and the more cities like San Francisco and New York and hopefully Portland take action to require technologies, the more that will spur the markets to produce it. Any other questions?
Nick, I have a question. You mentioned some solutions like the feather-friendly stickers. Where do you get those?
Yeah.
Just Google it?
Yeah, I would just Google it. Of course, our nature store at Maine Audubon, you can purchase it from us, where we have to order by phone or online right now. We're not open in person, but yeah, I'm not sure the entire range of folks who carry these products. Online is the best way. I know Freeport Wild Bird Supply in Freeport has some, but it's not necessarily super widespread yet. We'll work on that too. Lynn has made her own Acopian strings. No, I think generally folks have seen success with 2 inches apart. That's a great question about adding horizontal strings, but I think if they're close enough together vertically, then that also prevents birds from wanting to fly in there. So I think you're safe, especially if you haven't found any strikes. I think that's a good indication as well. So thanks for doing that. Was that just string, or what did you use? Good. Anyone else tried their own white string? There you go. That works. Any other home remedies out there?
Yeah, I'm curious which one is there one you recommend over the others, or are they all good ones to try?
So far, they're all good ones. It's really whatever you're comfortable with, whatever you want to do. I have found, I think the stickers look the best. And like I said, these are like the feather-friendly type of stickers. Like I said, when those are on the windows, you really don't notice them at all. And so it's a really effective tool, I think. One of the things at Maine Audubon, we are looking to get funding to turn our headquarters in Falmouth into a sort of a showcase for the different technologies here. So we have a lot of glass, and we have strikes at our center. It's pretty embarrassing. But we're hoping to showcase the different solutions. Jay Perry, are there other cities showing signs following the effective footsteps of New York's? Yeah, absolutely. As this is a sort of growing issue with growing awareness, other cities are taking note. So recently there's, I don't know if it's Norfolk, Virginia, or a city in Virginia has taken action. Places like Toronto and Chicago and DC have long been proponents of this. I don't know if they have the same type of legislation yet, but and I'm hoping Portland will do it because it's the right thing to do. So yeah, you know, the evidence is incontrovertible, as you say, and the solutions are easy, and the problem is evident. So it can be done if we just buckle down and do it.
If any of you aren't familiar with the chat box function, feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question if you have one.
Well, if not, I really thank you guys for taking the time to join me today. If you would like to email me, please do it either at, I'll put it over here actually, nlund@maineaudubon.org. Or if you find birds, or if you want to volunteer to walk any routes in Portland. So what we're doing this is this is a project we're doing in partnership with University of Southern Maine and the Portland Society for Architecture and Avian Haven. We're going to meet tomorrow and walk our first route, and we're going to hang up some signs around the city. But if you want to volunteer, to get some exercise and walk around Portland, especially in September, looking for birds on the sidewalk, we'd love to have you. So shoot me an email at either one of those emails below, and we'll go. Oh, Priscilla. My home is on a small rise, making it the highest home in the neighborhood. I know this chat is about buildings being hit by birds. Peregrine falcon, oh man. Hanging objects outside is still a big issue. Yeah, that is a good question, Priscilla. So just a walk around the house shows where the birds keep hitting the back of the home. So they're hitting the back of the home most often. I would look into the sticker solution. If you can cover some of those windows with stickers that give you a sort of a much larger swath of protection, that might really help. Those things can cover a large area pretty quickly. The peregrine falcon was likely chasing a bird and you know, sort of got lost in the chase and hit the screen. So that probably wasn't a glass strike, you know, on its own. But if other birds are hitting it, it's definitely the windows. So I would look into the stickers for a large area. That might be the best solution.
And Nick, I think Priscilla was late to join us. You called them feather-friendly stickers, right? Yeah,
feather-friendly. There are a number of different products on the market. I don't know all of them, but a Google search for sort of, the best ones come in a tape with instructions about how to do it. So you roll the stickers out into a grid pattern that way. Those work really well.
And also, I don't know if you noticed, Sarah had a question before Priscilla. Is there a similar one in Boston? I think she's referring to the citizen science effort.
Yeah, not that I know of. Not that I know of. I don't know. I haven't heard anything coming out of Boston on this front. Boston, I'm sure, has the same issues that we have. You know, overall, you know, cities with older buildings like Portland are generally have less glass. If you drive around Portland, you look at, you know, the Custom House or something, you know, it's small windows on a large marble or rock face. That's generally better for birds. But one of the things I'm excited about is for our walks is seeing the difference between those buildings and a lot of the new buildings in Portland, which are mostly glass. And so we'll be able to see, I think, really clearly where the problems is. I mean, the walks. Yeah, Sarah, I don't think, I have not heard of one in Boston. You could try searching on the internet or getting in touch with Mass Audubon for that, but I'm not aware of one.
All right. Well, thank you, Nick. That was really, really informative. And I'm glad you included some solutions too. It's helpful to feel empowered to make change.
We can do it. We can do it. Thank you all so much for joining, and have a great afternoon.